Welcome to Rooting for You, a seasonal gardening podcast for non-experts. I'm Tess, and I know nothing.
And I'm Alyce, and I know some things.
Each week we'll chat about one gardening topic and then discuss the effort-reward payoff by asking, is the juice worth the squeeze? Just a heads up, there might be a bit of swearing in this episode. You've been warned. Hello again from remote recording in Melbourne lockdown. As always, excuse the slightly subpar audio recording. We will be back together in the same room, looking into each other's eyes as soon as possible. So we're bringing you a particularly sexy topic today. We're talking about mulch. Now, I throw a bit of a straw around and pretend I know what I'm doing, but who knows, you know? So today, we're going to find out. Before we get stuck into the nitty-gritty of the what and the how, let's start with why on earth should we be mulching our gardens?
I am such a massive fan of mulching. I'm very excited for this episode. And I'm going to start by saying if you are not mulching, you need to get mulching. Why? Well, should we first just say what is mulching? I mean, that might not be clear to people either.
What is mulch?
So mulching is the process of covering the topsoil with a layer of something. It actually can be many things, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But it's basically you've got your soil and you've got your plant in your soil. You can cover that topsoil with something, and it has benefits. What are those benefits? Firstly, it helps to suppress the weeds. This is good for multiple reasons. Firstly, it looks very nice in your garden.
Yes.
I'm a big fan of the aesthetics of mulch. But more importantly than that, when you don't have weeds, your plant that you want to grow, that you are trying to grow, isn't competing for resources, whether that be water, nutrients, space, whatever it is. So your plants are going to be really happy if they're grown in a weed-free environment. Keeping up the weeding yourself by hand, sure, go for it. It's not fun. It's time-consuming. It's a prick. By mulching, some weeds will still come up, but I would say you might suppress weeds by 90%, which is a massive gain for a task that really doesn't take very long. The next reason we are for the mulch is that it reduces evaporation from water evaporating from the soil. This means a few things. One, it's actually better for the environment because you're using less water to grow those plants. And it's actually better for you also because you won't have to water as often because that soil will retain more moisture. So, better for you, better for the environment, saves time, plants happy, everyone wins. The other thing is the worms really love it. So anything that supports the worms is going to support us in the long run. So when you think of topsoil, you can imagine some like dry kind of sandy topsoil on the top of your veggie patch. You're not going to see a worm close to that. That's just not going to happen. I promise you, once you start mulching and you create that like moist environment protected from light, the dark that the worms love, you'll actually see worms coming up way more frequently to the surface of your soil and really cultivating or making a home in your garden bed more than what they would have previously. So, again, it's just such an easy way to help them, which will then nurture your plants. So, have I sold you on why we're doing it?
Yeah, so we've got stopping weeds coming, brilliant. Water retention, fantastic. And making a better home for our worms. We've got win-win-win here.
We do. And we can actually add in another win here. If we use something to mulch that actually has nutrients in it, we can use the mulching process to feed the soil as well. Ho, 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 ho.
We might need to break that down. What kind of things are we talking about in terms of what would have nutrients and what wouldn't?
So when I said you can cover the topsoil with a layer of something, anything, some of those options could be rocks or wood chips or bark.
Ah, okay.
So in a veggie patch, you're probably not going to use rocks as your mulch, but in a native, even in your garden test where you've got your natives, I think from memory, there's actually some rocks that have been used as a mulch. They will do a really good job of suppressing weeds and retaining moisture, but they're going to offer the soil no nutrients whatsoever. Because they're not going to break down, right?
Ah, okay. So we're talking about things that might break down and things that will break down less, if at all.
Exactly. And something like wood chips or bark, they also do a really good job of suppressing weeds and retaining moisture, but they're not hugely nutrient dense fibers, so to speak. So, they're going to do two of the jobs, but they're not going to do all of them. So they're still great. And around trees and, maybe even perennial herbs, they can be really good. But for the veggie bed, they're not ideal. For the veggie bed, we are going to prefer pea straw or lucerne hay.
What is pea straw?
I think it is pea plants that are grown and then cut down and then baled up into straw.
Because I use pea straw, but I've got no idea what it actually is. Like, for everyone playing along at home, it just kind of looks like hay. I mean,
Yeah.
I couldn't tell if I had hay and pea straw in front of me, I couldn't tell you which one was which.
Oh, totally. And there's a million different types of hay and straw out there. So basically what it is it's all just a dried plant, right? Like a cut and dried plant that's been bundled up. And depending on what that plant was when it was alive, kind of determines the nutrient value it's going to bring to the soil. So pea straw has a lot of nitrogen in it. So it's a great way to add nitrogen to the soil.
I love that. Didn't even know that pea straw had nitrogen when I bought it, but it's fabulous.
It really is, especially if you don't have animals. Like, I have animals, so I've got plenty of nitrogen from their shit. But for you who doesn't, pea straw would be my absolute pick as to what to mulch with.
God, nailed that without even knowing.
You did. Look at you go. Now, pea straw will be more expensive than something like a standard dry bale of straw, but you are getting extra benefits with it. So you can buy it in a bale, like the old farmer rectangular bale that you'd sit on it.
Yep, something very cliched, yep.
Yeah, exactly. But, I mean, obviously, depending on your garden size, that may not actually be that may be too much for you. You can also buy bags of it. I think it's like a 50-litre bag from nursery stores and that kind of thing. So what you're going to buy just depends on how much you're going to use. You're obviously going to pay more for buying it in a bag than if you buy it in a big bale. But again, make the decision on how big your garden is. But if your garden's huge, I'm saying buy the bale. Don't just get the small bags. Now, I just want to draw the distinction here between the pea straw and the lucerne hay. They're great. What you often see around is your standard straw. This is like your yellow, straight, massive bale of straw. What that is that's a byproduct from the grain industry. So when they grow wheat, for example, something we grow and consume heaps of here in Australia, once they harvest that wheat, they're harvesting the top of the plant. The kind of sticky strawy bit underneath is then cut and bundled as a byproduct. It's not particularly nutrient dense at all. So it's not for you in your garden. It's not a great benefit. But here's the thing for anyone with animals it's the cheapest form of straw there is for starters. So that makes it appealing. It's also incredibly dry. So a lot of people, including me, will use it in their animal bedding or enclosures. So this is chickens for me, but also anyone with rabbits or guinea pigs or those kind of pets. You'll put straw in their bedding. What then happens is the animals will shit, as they do, and that shit kind of gets absorbed up into this really dry straw. This goes on over a couple of months, and then you get to the point that you need to clean out that straw. Now, what I have now is I have this unnutrient dense straw that is now filled with animal shit. So it actually makes the straw become a powerhouse for the garden because you've got that mulching element and you've got that nutrient element all bundled into one. So if you've got animals, use straw in their bedding, in their house, and then when you clean it out, use that to mulch your garden. That's going to be an absolute powerhouse, but only because it's got the shit in it.
Yeah, right. That's really great if you do have a guinea pig or a rabbit at home you kind of bring that straw back to life.
You are, exactly. And it's just such an easy way also to, like distribute the animal manure into the garden because it's kind of already like in the straw, and then it keeps the cycle going. Like I've had, and I thought that this was kind of an obvious way to use it, but I have had people on Instagram say to me like, oh my God, it never occurred to me to like use the animal bedding as my mulch. And you absolutely can, and you absolutely should. And it's such a brilliant kind of ecosystem in the garden where I've taken a waste product from farmers
the wheat,
and from wheat, which, I eat bread, pasta, etc. So I've taken that byproduct that they have no use for, I've given it use for my animals, and then it provides a mulch for me. So it's a really good circle of life. But I only want people doing that if they've got the animals to kind of
right. And if you don't have an animal, it's not for you.
Exactly. If you don't have an animal, it's not for you. You need to invest in the slightly more expensive but way more nutrient-dense mulch, which is pea straw or lucerne hay. Autumn leaves make a really good mulch as well. They're not particularly nutrient-dense, but they will break down quite quickly, and worms are really happy in that leaf litter. So that's another one that you can use, probably less at this time of year in spring, but, mulching is an activity that we will be doing year-round. So in the autumn months, that, and even in winter, that can be a really good option as well. So use what you've got, but I do think there is a place for purchasing the quality stuff as well.
If it came to a time that you wanted to put some more compost on your soil or whatever, do you push the mulch away, put the composting down, and then push the mulch back on?
The mulch will break down over time. So if it's in its kind of breaking down stages, and what that means is like you will have put it on, it'll be big and thick and kind of bouncy, and then over time it's going to kind of like break into smaller bits and kind of start disintegrating and disappearing. It depends where you are in the mulch cycle.
Okay.
If your mulch is disintegrating quite rapidly at this point, you can just put your compost straight on top of it. If you freshly mulched, then what I would actually say you probably would have been better to do is like put your compost down and then mulch on top of it. But say you're listening to this episode and you have already mulched and you haven't got your compost on, of course you can spread it aside, put your feed on, and then spread it back over. Of course you can do that. It's just probably a little bit more work that may not be necessary. Yeah, if you time it well, you can like feed, then mulch. And then next year, that might last you a year, and then next year you'll do the same thing again. So when you start mulching, first off, it's going to do the suppression and the retaining of moisture instantly, but then later on, it will start the decomposing process. And actually, when the decomposing process starts, this will actually help your soil retain water as well, because you know how in other episodes I've talked about how adding compost, adding inputs to your soil actually helps it retain water. So it's like at the start, it's keeping water in from retaining moisture perspective. And then later on, it's actually helping with water retention in the individual soil. So the benefits just keep on going with this process. And then you need to make sure that once it is breaking down, you top it up again. So it's a gift that keeps on giving, and it's a cycle that you'll continue.
How thick a layer should your mulch be?
The thicker the better to an extent, because if you think about a weed coming up, if you mulch quite thinly, it's not providing as much resistance to a weed. But at the same time, we're not going to be going a foot of mulch here. That's just not going to be practical. I would say we'd be looking at maybe 10 centimetres.
Okay.
When you buy your straw, assuming that's what we're using here, it often comes in kind of biscuits, like bits that are compacted together. The inkling will be to actually break up those biscuits and spread it around because it'll look quite pretty. But if you layer those biscuits, because they're so dense, that will actually also provide additional power force against the weeds coming up.
I definitely broke up the biscuits.
It looks better.
And I sprinkled it around.
The layering will last longer. So if you can, do a bit of layering and then kind of spread it around the edges so it all blends together and kind of patch any holes you've got there. Here is the most important thing you need to know before mulching though. You have to make sure the soil is properly hydrated, properly watered before you mulch. This is for a couple of reasons. Is mulch in and of itself, if you're using something like straw, is really dry. And it's actually going to suck up moisture from the soil. So you want that soil to be properly hydrated in the first place. So any kind of sucking up it does is not going to leave the plant in a bad way. The next thing you got to remember is that you're now creating this barrier between the water and the soil. So it needs to start off in a good place, because say when it rains, it might rain that night and you're going to get a little sprinkling on the mulch, and the mulch might be all moist, but did the soil underneath actually get any water? Probably not. So you also have to remember when you are watering, You want to give it a really good water and make sure you're not just wetting that mulch layer, that you're actually watering right down to the soil. And if you're not clear on whether that's happening, I want you to, fossick in the mulch, pull a little bit of it aside and stick your hand in and actually see, is this soil underneath moist? So it might take you a little bit longer when you're actually watering, but the good thing is you'll have to water a lot less. And this could be the difference between watering twice a week and watering once a week. Like, it might actually halve your watering time.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Which is quite significant. Yeah. Now, when your seedlings are young, so let's talk about in practice when you're actually going to do the mulching. At the moment in spring, early spring, we're planting a lot of little seedlings. Spring's a really great time to mulch because we want to get all those benefits happening before the weather warms up, because once the weather warms up, the soil is going to dry out really quickly and weeds are going to go bananas. So if we get the mulching done early spring, that's really going to serve us in good stead throughout the warmer months ahead. The thing is, though, if you've got this tiny seedling that's like 5 centimeters up from the soil and then you go and put 10 centimeters of mulch around it, you actually can end up smothering the seedling. So the same benefit you want for the weeds may actually end up appealing to the seedling also. And obviously, if you've planted seeds, you can't mulch until they've come up properly. So I think the best way to do this is to get your seedlings in, wait a couple of weeks until they've got a bit of height to them. So that might be 10 plus centimeters, then mulch around them and make sure you keep a bit of a collar around the plant.
Okay.
So I don't want the mulch going right up to that stem. Once that plant is bigger in like 2 months, then we can just, shove the mulch right around the stem and it'll be totally fine. But just give it a little bit of a wide berth at this point.
Something you said quite quickly just then, but I just want to amplify. We are not mulching our seeds.
No, because what a weed is, right, is a weed is a seed in the ground wanting to germinate. So if we're going to suppress our weeds, you are absolutely going to suppress every seed that you have planted. And look, honestly, it's something like your rocket patch, which you may grow from seed, that's going to be quite dense with rocket, you're actually not going to be able to mulch because there's nowhere to kind of fit the mulch.
Ah, okay. Yep, that's a really good point as well.
Yeah, so, and something like radishes also, you're probably going to plant them quite intensely and there's not going to be any mulching situation going on. Things like tomatoes, things like zucchinis, things like pumpkins, they are going to absolutely benefit hugely from the mulch. Especially the things that are quite big and have a lot of kind of empty soil around it. So like a tomato, you have one stem coming out of the soil and then you've got 50 centimetres all around with nothing going on. That's the kind of soil that we absolutely do not want to leave bare. If you have already mulched and you're listening to this now and you haven't planted your seedlings, that's totally fine. What you can do is kind of get your hands and, like a bird making a nest, just spread that mulch aside from the part that you're going to put the plant in. So just form a little...
Like a little well?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. That's the perfect term. Yeah, form a little well and get your plant in. So it's not a big deal at all, but probably it does make sense to kind of get your plants in first and then mulch around. Things like fruit trees and perennial herbs, for example, we're going to want to keep these mulched all year round. Spring's a great time to do it, but it's by no means an essential time to do it. It will, again, the same as I talked about with the seedlings, the veggie seedlings, it's going to mean that you're going to have to water them less and there's going to be a lot less weed activity. So it is ideal by the end of spring to have your entire garden mulched.
Fabulous. So the big question, is the juice worth the squeeze? This is where we look at the effort-reward ratio of today's topic. The categories are superstar, high effort, high reward. Completing this will make you feel like an absolute rock star. Best on ground, low effort, high reward. Quick wins and fill-ins, low effort, low reward. And finally, the wooden spoon, high effort, but not much reward.
I think it's pretty clear to everyone that I am a massive fan of the mulch and squeezy juice wise, it's going to be a winner. But tell me, Tess, where's your head at?
So we started talking about the benefits, weed suppression. I mean, weeding is absolutely something that I'm not interested in doing. So that's a win. Water retention, great for the environment, great for the water bill. Looking after our worms. Everyone knows how obsessed I am with my worms. So look, the benefits are all there. Difficulty level is the easiest thing that we've ever spoken about. Like just throwing around a bit of straw. How easy is that?
Yeah, I mean, aside from watering, it may be the easiest thing we've ever discussed. And you are so right that there's a few things I'm not particularly interested in the garden. Weeding is one of them. And frankly, I don't even like watering. Like, I do it because I have to, but that doesn't fill me with joy either.
So it's definitely best on ground.
Maybe that's part of the squeezy juice matrix. It's not just the effort. It's like how enjoyable or lack of enjoyable is that particular task. And I'll tell you what, anything that is going to get rid of those weeds for me is going to be absolutely best on ground.
And it's also reducing the time that you're out there watering as well.
Yeah, exactly.
For people who are using a handheld hose like I am, but you just turn your watering system on and off.
I probably spend half the year, like I probably spend as much time as you do watering, just tinkering with my bloody watering system.
Now that is a topic for another day.
It is.
Rooting for You is hosted by Alyce and Tess, artwork by Lauren Janine. You can find us on Instagram at rootingforyoupod or email rootingforyou@alycealexandra.com. And remember, we are rooting for you.